start recording. And I am Farrah Green. I am president of the International Horsemanship Association. I welcome everyone who came to this call tonight. Thank you so much for coming. And if you have not so far checked out the International Horsemanship Association, we do have new rates for membership. Remember, it is a nonprofit, which means all of the funding that we collect goes back into prolonging the organization. And we're hoping that great horsemanship, relationship-based horsemanship goes on far beyond my term of being president there. So please check it out. And we are very lucky this evening to have Dr. Pat Holl with us tonight. And I'd like to just tell you a little bit about Dr. Holl before we get started. So Dr. Holl is she's a doctor of chiropractic, and she's also certified in animal chiropractic with the American Veterinary Chiropractic Association, as well as the International Veterinary Chiropractic Association. Dr. Holl has almost 2 decades of experience in comprehensive chiropractic care for pain management, rehabilitation, pre- and post-surgical conditioning, and general wellness. She has been with the Yellowstone Naturopathic Clinic since 2006, where she works with patients to relieve musculoskeletal pain without drugs or surgery. She coordinates patient chiropractic care with other specialties, alternative and allopathic, for patient benefit, and frequently lectures to medical professionals and the public on chiropractic medicine and the benefits of appropriate stretching and exercise for pain management. And she instructs patients on the importance of postural alignment as well as movement. And believe me, she also does that with equines, and that's actually what she's going to be talking about tonight. So, Dr. Pat, let's all welcome Dr. Pat here. And I'll let you go ahead and just before Dr. Pat gets started, I have to say, I have had a lot of people treat my equines, and one of the reasons that I asked Dr. Pat to come on tonight was that she has made a huge difference in the movement and health of my equines. And I don't just say that lightly. I'm actually pretty skeptical most of the time, but I'm very scientific by nature, and with working with Dr. Pat, my stallion had an injury when he was quite young. He actually crushed one side of his jaw, and his face was completely paralyzed on one side. And it took him quite a while for that, the nervous system and the nerves to grow back on the side of his face. He couldn't blink his eye. He couldn't, his lip was dangling. And so he recovered, but as I started to do higher level maneuvers with him, I noticed that he didn't have equal flexibility on both sides. He had about 70% on the right side compared to the left. And it was very strange, Dr. Pat, actually, because I was hoping, I was kind of asking the universe, you know what, I need somebody to help me with this problem. I had his teeth done, and it was very strange because I think 2 weeks later, you showed up on my doorstep. So, so I believe in the power of the universe connecting people, and that's basically what we're doing tonight. We're trying to connect more people together. So through the first treatment, he was improved, but actually I noticed the most improvement, almost 100% equality on both sides after the second treatment. And I think, and I'm sure Dr. Pat will talk about that tonight, but I'm sure something that has been around, he's almost 12 years old now. So an injury that has been in their body that they've been compensating for that long might not be 100% better after obviously one treatment. So Dr. Pat has a fabulous presentation for us tonight. Go ahead and take it away, madam.
Well, thanks, Farrah, and thanks everybody for having me. I am the staff chiropractor at the Naturopathic Clinic here in Billings. I am also on the staff of the College of Animal Chiropractic in Kansas. I've been teaching down there about 15 years, and I speak around the world on this. I've been to Italy a couple times speaking about this, and at our national convention in New Mexico last November. we had over 7 countries represented you know, doctors of animal chiropractic. So it's really exciting. What I want to talk to you today, it primarily is about your horses and the health of your horses, and how you can promote the health yourself, and some ways to do that. And I would like to start with why it's so important that we consider movement and motion. So that's the direction we're going to move in. I'm going to jump over to my PowerPoint, and Farrah, I'll ask you to interrupt me at any time if you need to, if you have questions, if you want to slow me down.
Absolutely. And for those of you watching tonight, remember you can type your questions into that chat feature at the bottom of your Zoom bar, and I will see that, and I'll try to pick a good point at which Dr. Pat can answer those questions. So absolutely.
Okay, so here we go. Let me just get this up, and you can type. Is that up for everybody?
It's loading, and now it is. It's perfect.
Okay. Okay, so the Neurology of Equine Chiropractic. Let me just see if I can get this to move. And it's not advancing. And why is that not? Oh, there we go. This is a quote I like to begin my lectures with. It's by Nietzsche. And those of you who know him, there's a wonderful movie out there, When Nietzsche Slept. But and those who were seen dancing were thought to be insane by those who could not hear the music. And as a chiropractor, you know, many times, I know that what I do as a chiropractor is all about the neurology. And many times people think that we just crack bones, and mercifully we don't crack anything. So I just wanted to share that with you. One of my favorite quotes. I love
that quote. I'm going to remember that. Thank you.
Okay, today's focus, I'm going to talk about the importance of motion and movement, and why when you touch something and you physically deform tissue, how that changes the brain. Okay, so let's go. So we're going to look at the consequences of immobility, the critical importance of movement, and when you touch something, when you rub your shoulder, why does that feel better? Well, I'm going to tell you why. You're going to know why by the end of this conversation today. Incidentally, Farrah, do you have a screen down the middle of yours with everybody's face, or can you see the whole PowerPoint?
Actually, what you can do, Dr. Pat, you can just click on the top bar of that and you can move that.
Move it over there. I just did. Thank you. How about that?
That will be much easier to see.
Okay. Okay, and finally, the last thing we're going to talk about is, you know, chiropractic. I mean, I am a chiropractor, but I am going to provide you guys with some recommendations as to how you can do some of these things on your own, so that you don't need me or anyone else. It's just you and your horse, and how you can move ahead. And of course, I'm going to talk about the brain and the nervous system and how movement affects the brain. We'll talk a little bit about what chiropractic is, and you know, it's not going to necessarily focus on chiropractic. I'm really going to talk about motion. And overall health. So I hope you guys will take a little journey with me, and we'll briefly tell you that chiropractic, you know, chiropractic centers around optimizing the biomechanics in the body. We restore motion to the joints. When the joints stop motioning, the receptors in the joint do not reach the brain, and the brain cannot issue output. And that's really at the bottom of it, because movement it matters to our neurologic survival, our neurologic evolution. We need to move the parts. Now, this is what I want to say to you. There's a difference between movement and motion. We can all move our necks, right? Everybody out there in video land tonight, you can all move your necks, right? Now, if I sat you down here one by one and I adjusted your neck, you would hear pop, pop, pop. That's because the joints aren't motioning, right? So movement is full body. The horse can run across that arena at a full clip. It does not mean the joints are motioning, all right? And that's a real critical distinction for us tonight, because when I go ahead, I'm going to talk about movement, but I'm really meaning motion. I'm meaning motion of the joints of the body. Okay. So when the joints of the body motion, they provide vitally needed stimulation to the brain via receptor activation. I won't get too technical. I don't want to bore you guys, but I will delve into that just a little bit. Now, I believe that movement is the secret to health. Now, my medical director, who's a naturopathic physician, will say, no, nutrition is the secret to health. And I'll say, no, movement is the secret to health. So of course, it's both of those things, right? What we fuel our bodies with matters so much. And but moving the parts matters too, because when the parts are moving, they're asking for blood, they're asking for oxygen, they're asking for nutrient flow from the nerves. All right, so let's talk a little bit about joint motion. Can you see my little cursor?
Yes, actually we can. And I actually have a question, Dr. Pat. Maybe you're going to get to this, so please stop me if you are. But normally, because you talk about the difference between motion and movement, what begins that restriction of motion? Is it?
That's a great question. So it's actually a sequelae of events that ensue. It starts out with, let's say, a muscle pull. Let's say your horse steps in a gopher hole and just pulls a muscle slightly, right? Maybe the tib anterior, maybe just one of the muscles in the lower extremities. All right, so then that muscle goes into a little bit of an alarm. And so maybe there's a little swelling, maybe. And then what happens is adhesions start to lay down. And then the fascia that's in our bodies, and fascia is everywhere, but that starts to be multi-directional and it's very sticky, and that starts to lay down on top of the adhesion layer. And then fibrosis starts to lay down. And before you know it, it ultimately ends up in an arthritic joint, perhaps. But prior to that, there's this whole course of events that ensue. And that's why I'm saying that we catch that early. You catch that there's a lack of motion in the area, or maybe you just maintain optimal motion with chiropractic or acupuncture or dry needling or stretching or any of these things that we'll be discussing. You do the maintenance work, and then you really have to worry so much less about an injury occurring, because the brain's receiving 100% of the information it needs to receive, and then it can issue 100% of output. And I want to talk about that in a second, but is that okay?
That's a great answer. Thank you very much.
So at the heart of any injury is reduced joint mobility, all right? The joints, again, I'm going to belabor this point, but joints have to motion. You get a hypomobility in the neck right in here, and you can see, well, it's clear as mud, I'm sure, to somebody who doesn't read x-rays all the time. But there's a restriction right at this joint in here, and so that's a hypomobility. So now what you can't see on an x-ray, because radiation burns everything else out, is that these adhesions and the mineral salts, and the body's going to speed up its mineral salt matrix and lay down these adhesions, and that's going to restrict the region more comprehensively. Okay, so what happens when a joint is stuck? I mean, that's at the crux of what I want to tell you tonight. So if you hear nothing else, please understand, when you have a single stuckage, a lot happens. A lot happens with one single stuckage, with one joint that's just slightly not functioning at its optimal level. So let's look at some of the things that happen. This is Dr. Emil, way back in 1982, said when you have loss of motion, normal motion within a joint, that results in changes in every structural component, from the subchondral bones to the synovial fluid. I mean, everything that's surrounding that joint, the muscles, tendons, ligaments, the fascia, the nerve supply, the blood supply, everything in there. And so there are biomechanical effects of a stuckage. By the way, stuckage is my medical term for hypomobility. So if you want to, hang out with the docs, just say, hey, you have a stuckage? So anyway.
I was wondering if that was a real term.
It's not.
I love it.
It's Dr. Pat on the Back's term for hypomobility, but it means the same thing, right? It's a stuckage in there. So when you have a ligamentous injury, when you have a tendinous injury, a muscle injury, that leads to a very unstable joint, because what stabilizes the joint? What stabilizes a bone in a capsule. It's the collateral tissue, right? That's what keeps something very strong. And so when you have damage to those supporting structures, that results in an increased burden in the joint, and hence, you start to have micro trauma in and around the joint. And again, that leads to the formation of those things that I was answering Farrah's question with about adhesions and fibrotic tissue, and ultimately, an osteoarthritis can ensue. And this is just a picture of some canine osteoarthritis. I should have put it in a healthy canine joint, so forgive me. But there's real deformation of the femoral head in here. And by the way, dogs get that hip dysplasia, and you can see spurring out here and so forth. So anyway, and this all starts with the muscles and tendons out here that become weak and injured. And that's how this joint starts to break down. All right, some of these slides, forgive me, are very verbose, so I won't read them to you. I don't really believe in reading PowerPoints, but just understand that as the hypomobility, as that stuckage progresses, it lends itself to secondary and tertiary problems. The muscles start to pull the joints past their neutral. One bone can subluxate in relation to another, and then all of a sudden you start to get that adhesive buildup. So your horse has a little bit of a lameness, and then all of a sudden there's a compensation, right? I mean, he's not going to walk on the lameness, he's going to compensate. So that's going to burden the other extremity. And then perhaps his gait pattern is going to be altered. And you can see how this can impact him systemically. Mm-hmm. So again, and then there's all sorts of systemic problems. There's proteoglycan loss, there's chondrocyte loss, and these are things in the cellular matrix. And this all happens, again, with one stuckage, just one, right? It's extraordinary. But, a stuckage, a hypomobility affects more than just the biomechanics. And that's where I'm going with the systemic problems, right? There's lactic acid buildup. There's decreased delivery of oxygen. It impedes circulation. And before you know it, it's affecting your horse globally. Mm-hmm. How's my pace? Okay, am I going too fast? You okay, everybody?
No, I think it's quite good. And talking about the stuckage, so you told it could be an injury, but it could just be a lack of movement that can cause a stuckage as well, isn't it?
Or how about this? It could be a saddle on a back. Mm-hmm. Oh, and then it could be a bit in the mouth. Mm-hmm. And then it could be a person sitting on that saddle. Mm-hmm. Oh, and then let's go run some barrels.
Right.
I mean, can you see how that is and so then you have a horse that's running vertically or horizontally, and you're vertical, and then there's all sorts of vectors involved, and at varying speeds, and on varying terrains. And so let's say that would be good enough to cause a stuckage. I mean, we're on cell phones, and that causes immobilities and hypomobilities.
I think I'm going to talk more about vectors when I teach my lessons, Dr. Pat. Thank you.
You what?
I'm going to talk more about vectors after listening to your conversation in my lessons.
For sure. So really, I mean, I really think about horses, and I guess this applies to some camels, but they're one of the few animals that we actually sit on their spines. And so that's a burden, right? I mean, it's a burden to their structure and their composition. So there are things that we can do to ensure the health and maintain, the nerve flow and the blood flow. And so we can offset the burden of ourselves on a horse. And, it doesn't matter if you're little like me, or you're not so little. I mean, it's still a burden, whatever your size, when you put someone on the spine of a horse. So, however, knowing this, we know what to do about it, and we know how to correct it, and we know how to maintain optimal health with that. Okay, so here's a little photo, just, immobility, the tissue motion and the ability of a tissue to stretch, to reach out, becomes limited, and it can become retracted and contractile, right? And then that results in loss of blood flow to the tissue, loss of oxygen, because the O2 attaches to the hemoglobin. And so when the oxygen can't attach to the blood, you're just not getting nutrition, right? So without movement, you're not getting nutrition to that part. Very simple. Right? Again, saying more of what I just said, you cut off your oxygen supply, you increase your metabolic demand. You're begging for more in that area, right? So you don't get it in that joint, right? It's not moving, so it's asking for more. So the body says, the carpus is not motioning in the manner that I need it to, so I'll lay down more mineral salts, and I'll lay down my adhesions, and I'll wind up my fascial, and you can see how this cascades. So, and this results in what we call an energy crisis, because it's a cellular and metabolic crisis that occurs. And we can go a really long time without it showing up out here. You can have a universe of activity that's occurring within your body without it showing up out here. And then finally one day you're just going out for your daily canter and you're saying, wow, my horse is lame. What happened? Well, what happened was something that happened a year and a half ago, when you stepped in that gopher hole, or, you ran that barrel and it knocked into the wall, or you took that jump and you didn't land, symmetrically. And all of a sudden all of this tissue breakdown began. Is this making sense, everybody? I'm hoping.
Yes, it sounds like there's quite a cascade of events that can occur. And thank you for reminding me, it's not just about the bone. It's definitely about the tissue around it.
The bones are really the last thing. Bones are soldiers. They do what they're told to do. A bone doesn't just sit there and move out of position, right? It's a tendon that attaches to the bone, and that tendon also on the other side attaches to the muscle. The muscle gets injured and it starts to yank the bone either out of place, or it gets stuck in place. And where we call that a joint position error. Chiropractors have big fancy names for it, vertebral subluxation complex, but really it's a position error, because there's no motion. And we're just going to get briefly into the neurology of why that's so important. But I just wanted to mention that, it leads to inflammation, it leads to more pain, and then you get these trigger points, and then you activate these receptors called muscle spindles, and ultimately it's a global impact on the horse. And I'm not going to go into all of this, but I just want you to appreciate that there's morphologic, biomechanical, biochemical, a litany of systemic effects that result when there's an immobility, when there's one immobility. And by the way, who has just one immobility? I promise you, every one of you can come here to my home and sit down, and I'll adjust your necks, and you'll hear some motion going on. But you have hyaluronic acid falls, water content is reduced. It just goes on, and our spinal discs are particularly vulnerable because they are critically dependent on movement for nutrition. And so again, as humans, we're upright, right? So nobody's sitting on our spines. So, but as horses and canines and bovines and all the others, they're not upright, they're horizontal. And so if you look at this picture and think, I'm sitting on that, oh yeah, I'm gonna throw a saddle on that and a pad, and then I'm gonna navigate this performance. I mean, it's a burden. However, there's stuff we can do about it, but you can see how that might lend itself to this getting stuck, to these areas getting mineralized and trying to get adhesive in an effort to support us on top of that animal, right? So immobility really is a burden, and it leads to, as I mentioned, to secondary and tertiary problems later on. And then you just get these arthritic scenarios, and in equine you see this quite often too, in the mid back, and you see you've heard of maybe kissing spines and different things in the equine community. But anyway, so just a couple pictures. I'm not going to talk a whole bunch about biochemistry, number one, because I don't like biochemistry, but I can't get away from it because it does go hand in hand with neurology. But when arachidonic acid is released, that it just causes more inflammation, and a stuckage causes that release. So we go from there. But so just a reminder, in every joint, there's bones, ligaments, discs, muscles, tendons, fascia, dura, vessels, blah, blah, blah. And then there's nerve supply, blood supply, and then you lose oxygen. And then you want to consider, how long have you had the burden? How intense is the injury? Is there a postural burden? What am I doing with my horse? Is it a hunter jumper? Is it a barrel? Am I a rodeo? Am I roping? Am I team roping? All of these are variables in the very important equation of your horse's health. And so basically,
actually, I don't know if it's okay to interrupt for a moment,
please.
Dr. Pat. There was a great question from Kathleen. She asked, have you found that there's a big difference between stalled horses and pasture horses?
Yes, very, very big. It used to be that injuries, we go right away to stall rest, right away. We don't do that anymore. I mean, and, I teach at the college, and we pretty much have cutting edge, information. And we're finding that, in some cases you have a fracture or something like that where you really need to immobilize. Yes, you must have stall rest. And incidentally, the veterinarian comes first, right? Many, many times people call me up and their horse is injured, and I'll always say, did you get a vet clearance, right? Mm-hmm. Because they're the primary treating physician for the horse. I'm a referring specialist, mm-hmm. right? Just like in my human practice, I am the primary treating physician, right? Mm-hmm. But in the equine, the veterinarian is there. So the difference between stall rest and pasture, we had a horse down at the college not too long ago who had injured the stifle, and the owner wanted it on stall rest, right? So we had it on stall rest only because, in deference to the wishes of the owner. And then, we have these big pastures out there. So the third day, the owner said, well, you guys do what you think is right. So immediately all the doctors are, all the staff is running down to the barn and opening the doors so the horse, and we just let her walk out. We let her decide. And she walked out and she came alive because she was breathing. Her respiration was better. Mm-hmm. Her blood flow was better. She was engaging her body fluids and all her systems. Her digestion was waking up, because when you're still, nothing's moving. When all of a sudden you're moving, things start to initiate repair. Mm-hmm. I hope that answered her question.
I think that she was wondering the difference, if you've seen a difference in just general health as well, which it sounds like absolutely.
Absolutely.
And,
now, stall rest has its place. I'm not gonna say it doesn't. It has its place.
Mm-hmm.
But and even let me just tell you, even in the human community, it used to be when you have a hip surgery, we keep you down. Now the next day we're getting you up. The next day after a hip surgery, after most surgeries, we're getting you up and moving and put the body through what it normally does naturally, so that it can initiate repair more comprehensively. Okay. Anyway, I just want to point out on this slide, the biggest outcome of an immobility is susceptibility, vulnerability. You're vulnerable, right? Forget about these verbals. I'm going to jump over some of these slides because I'm just going to synopsize them for you. I want to break it down a little bit through neurology. The nervous system is the key. Now, the central nervous system is the brain and the spinal cord. And the peripheral nervous system are all the nerves that go through everywhere throughout your body. So I'm just going to, let's see, can I go back? So if you see this slide, you see that nerves are everywhere. I mean, they're just everywhere, right? And so neurons are everywhere. But the body has an amazing potential to heal itself. You cut your arm and you do nothing. What's going to happen in a week? It's going to heal, right? Even if you don't doctor it. So, and that's the nervous system, because it's just a universe. And it's the master system, right? It's the one in charge. The nervous system has authority over the muscular system and the skeletal system and the endocrine system. The nervous system's in charge, right? And it's the main control center, and it receives all the information, and then it sends messages. And it controls how fast you walk, how you listen to a song. That's the nervous system. That's what that does. So that's a really important thing. And it can cause things to happen in the body, and it can be affected by things that don't happen in the body. For example, stuckage, all right? This was a great quote by Feldenkrais: "The brain without a body cannot think, and the muscles themselves are part and parcel of our higher function." So it just really wanted to share with you the intimate relationship between the brain and the body, because they need each other. They are in a indissoluble union. What one communicates to the other. You know, I can't snap my fingers without my brain instructing my fingers to do so. But we're just going to talk about that. So here's what I'm going to synopsize these next few slides. I'm going to jump over and I'm going to tell you what I'm talking about. Everything that comes into the brain, everything, whether you're a horse, whether you're a cat, whether you're a human, everything that comes into your brain is sensory information. Everything that goes out of the brain is motor information. All right? Okay. Sensory in, motor out. You hear a really, really, really loud noise, and the neurons in the temporal lobe of the brain, that's the area that perceives sound, they fire, and the brain says, wow, that's loud. Take your hand, put your finger to your ear, and plug it. Right? So sensory in, motor instruction. You go into a barn and it stinks. The brain says, it stinks in here. Take your fingers and plug your nose. Right? You go out into the sun and it's really, really, really bright, and the brain receives that information, sensory information, and it says squint your eyes. So motor instruction out. All right? This is going to become very important, because when you have a lameness, right, the brain is only issuing 70% of instruction to that extremity. Right? It's issuing 100% to your left extremity, but maybe only 70 to your right. Why is that? Because it's only receiving 70% of sensory information in. And that information comes from the joints and the receptors in the motion.
Can that obstruction of that nerve over time start to degrade the nerve, and you start to
absolutely
less and less information over time?
Nerve damage over time will worsen and can become irreversible. Oh, wow. It can. That's why people end up being in wheelchairs. You know, because they don't do anything about it, about situations, you know, or they have inappropriate care. That's what happens there. So this is just important as a foundation, right? So incoming sensory, outgoing motor. The brain gets the information, it processes it, you know, and it sends it out. Okay, it sends out the instructions. So when you have movement integrity that's compromised, there's a whole disorganization that occurs, that ensues, right? You have a stuckage somewhere in here, in your neck, right? And those receptors aren't getting to the brain, so the brain is only getting 60% of the information it needs for that limb, and it only issues 60%. So here's Dr. Roger Sperry. Now, he was a Nobel laureate, and he did a lot of information on something called hemisphericity and a lot of brain work. He just did a lot of good stuff. And he said, the more mechanically distorted you are, the less energy you have to heal, to metabolize, and to think, right? So, you know, the more mechanically distorted you are, stuckage, right? That's mechanical distortion. Joint position error, that's mechanical distortion. Carrying a backpack that weighs 80 pounds on one shoulder, that's mechanical distortion. You know, having a 100-pound saddle thrown on you and then going, you know, on a 100-mile ride, that's mechanical distortion.
Or having a rider sit crookedly on your back.
There you go. I mean, you know, but we know this, right? And we, as the ones, you know, who know our horses and care enough to attend a seminar, for example, on neurology on a Thursday night, you know, you're the ones who I love to speak to, because you're the ones I know who are going to do something about it. And I'm going to give you the tools with which to do something about it.
Just so
Okay.
you know, Dr. Pat, there's some great questions being asked, but I want you to be able to go through your through what you're going to say tonight. So maybe if we could take another 10 to 15 minutes with your presentation, and I want to make sure we get to these questions because they're quite good.
Okay, I am going to just sort of synopsize some stuff. Let me just go on. Dr. Sperry did demonstrate that 90% of the energy entering the brain comes from the spine. 90%, okay? 90%, what does that even mean? This is what that means. 90% of the stimulation and nutrition to the brain is generated by motion of the spinal joints. That's huge. 90%. You don't think we're looking at Alzheimer's patients and humans now and seeing how movable were their spines, right? And why is that? Because the spinal cord is in your spine, right? The spinal cord is inside and that's attached to the brain. So that's important. So you have loss of movement, you have loss of brain health. I won't get involved in this in too much, but I mentioned that 80% of the stability of the joint, it comes from the muscles and tendons. But here's what I want to say. So here's this pup. You can see my cursor, right? You can all see my cursor, I'm hoping?
Yes. Yep,
okay.
We can
And
see
so
it.
he has a paretic right upper extremity. You see that, right? Well, what happens? Well, let's say C6 in his neck. Let's say one of his cervical vertebrae is stuck. And I assure you in this case, it was. And so that isn't moving. So now the brain, so all the receptors from C6 are not getting up to this dog's brain. Remember, sensory in, right? So now the brain is getting 60% of the information. And so the brain is going to send down it's going to send down 60% of that information to this extremity.
Mm-hmm.
It's getting 100% of the information on this side.
Wow.
Because the neck is not stuck. That joint isn't stuck on that side, but it is on this side. So that's why adjustments and touch and motion and stretching are so important, because that allows the joints to maintain their freedom and the receptor activation to optimize. I hope that really drives it, because that's a real important, that's at the crux of what I'm saying tonight.
Well, actually, it makes a lot of sense. As a child, I actually would go to the chiropractor on a weekly basis, which is crazy to me. But you know, I got so irritated. I said, I'm not going anymore. I don't feel like it's really helping me. And the truth was, the chiropractor was telling me to do these stretches and to strengthen my body. And the problem from riding was that my ab muscles were so strong, they were actually pulling my vertebrae out of place on a consistent basis.
Overcompensation, of course, yeah.
And so I understand what you're saying. Absolutely, yes, we can put the bone back in alignment. Then you also have to address the soft tissue, otherwise it's not going to stay there.
You remember, bones are soldiers. They just do what they're told to do, and it's really the soft tissue work. That's why in my human practice, I do so much dry needling now and so much deep tissue work, because I'm addressing the collateral attachments, because they're what pull the joint out of position, right? They're what lock it up. So I don't want to bore you. I just want to talk a little bit about receptors. They're these they convert everything in the environment into a signal that you can interpret and understand. So in order for you to understand my voice and my words, you're receiving that sensory information in, and the receptors are activating to your brains and interpreting that and converting it into signals that you can get. And we all have receptors. And every time we use our bodies in any way, the receptors tell our brains about it immediately. All right, so I'm wiggling my fingers behind my head right now. How do I know I'm doing that? I can't see them. I can't hear them. Well, the receptors in my hand are coming in and instructing my brain, saying, she's wiggling her hand. Now, this gait control theory, I'm just going to synopsize, but it's super important. It's one of the greatest validations of movement that you'll ever see in your life. And this goes back a long time. Anyway, this is the theory that the spinal cord has a neurologic gate that either allows pain to get to the brain or allows that gate to be closed. Now, let me synopsize this for you. Let's say I'm sitting here and I smack my hand against the wall. So I smack my hand against the wall, and these receptor activations come in, they open the pain gate, and my brain says, ow, right?
Mm.
After I smack my hand, what's the first thing I'm gonna do after I cuss?
You're gonna feel a sting.
I'm gonna touch it, right? You smack your head against the wall. What's the first thing you're gonna do? You're gonna rub it, right? Because what we're doing when you injure yourself, you're activating pain receptors. And these pain receptors go in, open the gate and say, pain, alarm. And the brain says, physically deform the tissue, touch it, okay? Rub it.
Interesting.
Do something,
okay.
Right? And so it shuts the pain gate. And there's a reason for that, because the large diameter mechanoreceptors are faster than the pain receptors. So the next time you're at a party and you smack your head and somebody says, did you hurt yourself when you're rubbing it? You say, no, I'm just stimulating my large diameter mechanoreceptive axons to override the small diameter nociceptive input to close the pain gate.
That's brilliant. I'm going to say that the next time my horse rolls after I take the saddle off.
Right. Because I kid about that, but that's what you're doing. That's what we all do. We're all functional neurologists. Our shoulders hurt, we touch it. We rub it, right? If you watch your dogs and your cats, my cats kind of fight around all the time. And every once in a while, my bigger one gives my other one a left hook. And really, it gets the shot in there. And so right away, the little one immediately starts rubbing it. So I'm like, wow, my cat's stimulating their large diameter mechanoreceptive axons to override the small diameter nociceptive input for their pain and close the pain gate. Because that's what it's doing. I know I need to get a life, but really,
no, it's perfect. By the way, we are loving your pictures here. I'm getting so many great comments about how they're loving every minute of it, and we wish it wouldn't end. And so we might just have to have you back to finish this conversation if we don't get to finish it.
All right. Well, I'm going to rush through it because I want to just get through it. But so you understand the importance of touch for your horse. Maybe chiropractic, right? Maybe, physically deforming that tissue to restore motion, closing any pain gate that's open in there. This is all that I just talked about. This is all verbose slides and scientific slides that I don't need to bore you with. But the long and short of it is that the gate becomes closed when we touch tissue. When we touch an area that's sore, it feels better because we close the pain gate. Because the large diameter mechanoreceptive axons are faster and they triumph. Okay, I'm looking at my slides thinking I really do need to get a life. But anyway, so muscle spasms accompany pain, and that's because there is a neurologic relationship. When a joint is out of position, it engages it activates a muscle and causes it to go into an inflammatory state and causes spasm. So that's why when you adjust a joint, it reduces the spasm as well. This is all that. Let's just, so basically the chiropractic adjustment is the tool of movement. All right. I think, we're self-healing, and given the appropriate touch, we will reorganize. All right. We will reorganize. So we get it. Yay. So that was the gate theory. So a better understanding of that helps us to understand the effects of movement. All right. The effects of touch. All right. Don't you feel better? Because I sure do. All right.
Again,
just a couple more thoughts to ponder. I'm going to skip over neuroplasticity because that's something we could talk about later, and I'm happy to address that. But here are some ways that we can influence the nervous system to work better. Doing stretching. What is that doing? Is that physically deforming this brachiocephalicus right in here? Yes, right? It's stretching. And if any of you want to know anything about stretching, you better talk to Farrah, because I know very few people who are better equipped than her in terms of having a real comprehensive knowledge of muscle movement. So you have this resource right at your fingertips. So please utilize it. So stretching is super important. Soft tissue massage, right? Tissue massage, stimulate the blood flow. induced hyperemia to hypovascular tissue. Water therapy, so great, right? Because that horse is right in there is really using all of its resources to navigate through the water.
Where's the nearest water therapy?
Well, we have water treadmills here. I prefer water therapy without. The closest ones I know of are in Denver. So if anybody knows anything closer, please share that with me. Dry needling, acupuncture, we're physically deforming tissue. We're stimulating receptors. And of course, just had to put a plug in for chiropractic. You know, chiropractic really matters. So one last thing, this is the last thing I just want to talk about. Our brains are different than horses, right? Because our cerebellum, that's our balance, that's this part of the brain, the back, it has so many of our neurons. But the equine cerebellum is really large compared to ours, because a horse has to be able to flee. A horse is fully precocial when it's 1 day old. You know, stop and watch a colt run at a full gallop next to its mother at a day old. It's a miracle to me, and I never stop. I never cease to stop given the opportunity to watch that, because it's a miracle. Because how long does it take us to even stand up?
Yeah.
8 months?
Right.
Look at this colt. This colt's a day old. And you know that mama horse is, you know, we see this baby and we're like, oh, you can walk, it's a year. And you know that mama horse is saying, really? Because my baby did that in a day.
Literally,
You know?
my miniature horse baby was jumping over her mother before her mother was standing up after the birth.
It's
She was
extraordinary.
already jumping.
So think of the brain development there, right? I mean, we have a more developed prefrontal cortex for executive function and so forth. But anyway, you know, we have equine athletes, and you know, when you see your horse is bucking, it doesn't want to roll, it's cinchy, it isn't flexing, it's wringing its tail, pinning its ears, your performance is going down. You know, look what we ask them to do, by the way.
Oh, geez.
Right? This is what we ask their spines. By the way, horse and rider were fine on this right side of picture, just want to say. But look at this picture on the left. Isn't that every one of us at one point in our lives? Of course it was. You know? And there's nothing wrong with that, but look at the burden on the horse. Not to mention the stomatognathic system in the TMJ area, and that's a whole nother presentation. But anyway, so movement mitigates the residual effects of this injury, and so that's why every professional racehorse today, everyone has a chiropractor on staff. All right, so remember how critical movement is for your horse, because a little bit of maintenance can go a long way, and you'll be really happy you did. And I thank you for having me, and I'm happy to answer any questions you guys have. I'm gonna stop the share. And you know, I guess you have this presentation, Farrah, if anybody has questions on that. Is this okay?
Absolutely, that's perfect. Yeah, and you actually have there is so much interest in your presentation, Dr. Pat, and it looks to me like we might have to do another presentation, but there's some great questions along here. A simple question is, what is dry needling and how does it compare to acupuncture?
Well, if you're watching Q2, if you ever watch Q2, I just filmed a commercial yesterday explaining that very thing. Okay, so dry needling and acupuncture are similar only in that we use the same monofilament medical grade needle. That's the only thing in common. Acupuncturists work with the energy pathways and the meridians in the body in an effort to optimize the chi, the energy flow. Dry needling works with injury. We go into injury sites and we work with fascial restriction and those adhesions and the fibrosis I talked about. So the needle goes in and we needle, which means you twist the needle and the fascia wraps around the needle. And then we pull the needle out, and then it's like saran wrap that dispenses. You ever have a bowl with saran wrap on it and you poke a hole in it and it just dissipates. So when the fascia dissipates, then the blood can have transit and navigate through. So very different philosophies and purposes.
That was a great question by Kathleen. Thank you for asking that. I kind of, I guess, had assumed that it was the same thing, and it sounds like it's quite
way different.
Really. Let's see, we have some very specific questions. Sarah, are you able to talk? And if you are, I can unmute you if you are not able to.
Yes, I can.
Okay, perfect. So Sarah has a specific question about her horse for Dr. Pat.
Okay.
Well, it's a bit of a, there's a lot of backstory. He's a 2-year-old, I guess coming 3. And he's had a lot of issues, connective tissue issues, and I mean, bony growth in his stifles where there shouldn't be any. And the one thing that I have not had anybody do is chiropractic work. And one of the best vets that I have access to did diagnose him as having pressure on his spinal cord. And I just wondered if you felt like there could be that many radiating symptoms. I mean, his front legs kind of curl up and he wants to go up on his toes, and his stifles are full of fluid, and there's bone where there shouldn't be bone. And I just wondered if you think, you know, I've heard of extreme cases that required chiropractic adjustment. And I just wondered if there's any, I can't find anybody locally, but it's something I've been wanting to explore with him.
Well, first
before
of all,
I give up.
where is local, Sarah?
Northeast Wyoming.
Shout out of town.
Upton, close to Sundance.
Oh yeah,
close to Gillette.
Yeah, I go through Gillette every other month, just so you know that, because we go down to Rapid.
Okay.
And we have a loop there that we attend to. So of course, and I'm happy to stop by if you'd like. And of course, you know, I need more information. Was the horse windswept at all?
I didn't raise him. I bought him as a weanling, and he was slightly upright in the front, but he's half Arab, and you know, he's just built different than anything I have.
Yep. They have a different number of spinal vertebrae, Arabs. You know, this is something that, these are the types of horses I love to look at, because, you know, we just see miracles happen when we start restoring the motion, because, you know, you have one problem and the little guy's only not even 3. So he's making all these compensations for one problem. Then we're overburdening the pelvis, for example. Then his gait pattern is going to shift. Are you hearing me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So then,
yes, I was agreeing with his pelvis. His hind end is definitely odd and a bit hunched.
Yeah, well, it would have to be. And you know, because horses collect, right, and launch, you know, they need, and that pelvis is such a complicated mechanism. It actually moves in a figure 8 in its motion. And when it's adhesive, it can't navigate through that figure 8 motion. And so it goes into an anterior to posterior motion, and usually unilaterally. So then there's a litany of secondary problems, tertiary problems, and we just see it, and you know, get our hands on these athletes, and we get them better, you know. So don't give up hope.
I think
okay. Well, I would love for you to look at him.
Yeah, Farrah will give you all my contact information. I think it's on the front slide too of this presentation.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
Of course, I look forward to meeting you.
Sarah, fabulous horseman too, and it sounds like it's really lucky for you, Sarah. You're definitely right on the path, so that should work out great.
Right on the path.
I know that at one point I had a horse that actually fractured his coffin bone, and they said that should heal in a fairly short period of time, like 12 weeks. And after that period of time, he consistently was lame. He was lame for over a year. And I was at wit's end, and I was very lucky at the time. I don't know if you ever knew Dr. Wilson over in Sheridan, but he did some animal chiropractic as well. And I swear, I walked that horse into the clinic lame, and he took this rubber mallet and tapped on his vertebrae on his neck, and he was sound after that. It was quite amazing. So we can at least try and see if it's going to help. Okay, we have a question from Sue. She has a very particular case with one of her horses. Sue, are you able to unmute and ask that question in person?
Yes. Hi, Dr. Pat. I have a horse with a metal plate between P1 and P2, and this immobilized joint is now fused, but has affected the DDFT, causing mineralization on the tendon. And it's just really come to my attention, and we had him ultrasounded, And I've done periodic body work with him. And I'm just really at a loss as what more to do to help. If you can, is it possible to demineralize it? I mean, to break that apart?
Couple questions. How old is the horse?
10.
When was the hardware inserted?
4 years ago.
What was the accident?
He actually had a knee injury. Something impaled his knee, and it was casted, and it affected the joint, that pastern joint.
And they left the hardware in there? They didn't remove it?
No, it's still in there with screws, and that part has completely fused. It has a 3 to 4% mobility that is now completely. It's not mobile at all, which is affecting other parts of his leg.
Which is why we often, he didn't do it, but it's okay. But we often take the hardware out because the joint's fused, and you don't need hardware in there on top of a fused joint. Does that make sense?
You can actually remove that with this.
Yeah, well, not at this point. You can't.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that was never revealed to me.
Okay, that's so. Anybody else listening, if you do have hardware put in yourself or your animals, we like to get it out of there, unless it's a replaced hip or something, But you have a fractured arm, and we put hardware in there. We take that hardware out in a year because the joint's fused, right? Why the metal and the fusion? So anyway, so it's not. So that's okay. So what I would say to you is the burden on the collateral extremities is going to be great, right? Because of the compensation.
Yes.
So I would look to really motioning and restoring flow to the other extremities. I think you said, are you a massage therapist?
No, but I have him periodically massaged and worked on.
I think that's really the one extremity that is now sort of creeping its way up, which it will do. That's just how. And that's just the body saying, boy, you've asked so much of all of my tendons up the entire leg. I need to strengthen them too. So I'm going to speed up my mineralization matrix, and I'm going to make them stronger. Even though it's a good intention, it makes it more restricted. Does that make sense?
Somewhat. So in other words, really work on the opposite leg?
Well, no, I jumped back to the involved leg. The involved extremity, if it's starting to engage the joints above the injury on that extremity and to burden them. Of course, it's going to burden the other extremities. It's going to burden the pelvis. It's going to burden the neck motion, how he's able to turn from one side to the other, how he can launch, but the trick is he's only 10. I mean, that's not old. And he might not be, a champion hunter jumper, but he could still be an incredibly wonderful horse that can still participate in life. But you just really need it looked at closely by somebody who knows what they're doing. And where are you located?
Western Colorado.
I know some people down there. I mean, I know people all over the country, and I can give you access to a website that will hook you up with a certified animal chiropractor. And when I say certified, that means that they have to be either a licensed chiropractor or a licensed veterinarian, and then they'd have to have gone to the college, one of the colleges that certifies that on top of their license, and then they have to sit for a very intensive board exam, both practical and written. I'm certified nationally and internationally in that, so I'm always saying get a certified one, but I would be happy to provide you with a site where you can just click on find a doctor, and it will provide you with somebody close to your area who is certified.
Actually, Dr. Pat, that's perfect. Sue, thank you for asking that question, because there was another question: where can people look to find the nearest certified chiropractor? So if you can give us that link.
I can tell you right now where to go. How about I do that?
Sure.
It's the American Veterinary Chiropractic Association. You go to their website and just hit on find a doctor. And every state, all 50 states are represented, and you're going to see way more in, say, Texas. California seems to have a lot, but some of these areas, will have more. But and who was that from? Susan?
That was from Sue. Yeah.
So if you get hung up please just call me. You'll have my contact information, and I will help you find somebody close to you, and I may even know somebody.
Thank you. I really, really appreciate that. I guess with the mineralization, does that cause a lot of pain?
The answer is possibly. And so that's where you might want to think about some dry needling in there, right? To disrupt architectural disorganization.
Okay. Yeah, I was listening to that and wondered about that. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, of course.
Perfect.
And everybody listening, I want you to know that I'm happy to be a resource for you. If you need a referral, if you need just questions, I really want you to feel free to call me, because this is what I do. And for every one of you who has made the commitment and dedication to attend this tonight, that speaks volumes to me. So just know that you have my phone and my email at your disposal, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
And what we can do possibly, Dr. Pat, so if you, because I actually do a weekly question and answer session, maybe what we could do for the IHA for the members is set up a monthly consultation where you can come and do an hour.
Happy to do that.
So then everyone can, then we can make that an easier time for you. We would love that. Oh, everyone is cheering. So they would love that. Okay. Okay, so that link has been posted in the chat, just so you know. And we have one of our participants just want to mention something that happened with her horse. Ada, are you able to unmute yourself?
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Perfectly.
Wow, okay, I'm up the hill specifically to hear this event. Okay, so I think 2 years ago now, my then 5-year-old horse Kai came in from the paddock. He lives 24/7 turnout. He came in from the paddock unable to lift his head higher than his knees. It was super weird and super freaky, and I put him in the stall and called the vet and started crying, obviously. And I thought he'd broke his back or broke his neck or something along those lines, but half an hour later, when the vet arrived to answer our emergency call, Kai had lost vision in his right eye. His right side of his face kind of went limp. He could only walk in circles to the left. He was dragging both right feet. He became completely unresponsive to my voice, and I could only drag him after me somewhat, only if we were turning left in like these sad little spirals. And we thought that he had some kind of EPM or something like that. We were absolutely distraught. We did every possible blood test, x-ray, spinal tap, you name it. We tried absolutely everything. I stayed with him all night. He did not improve. We took him to the vet college. We paid for every single test under the sun just so that I thought that I could save him. And after 3 days of torture and no sleep and crying, they had no diagnosis for us, and they sent us home and said, you can just give him some bute and see what happens, best of luck to you. So I brought him home, and people said, have you tried a chiropractor? And I said, well, I didn't think about it, but I absolutely will try that. And so we contacted 3 chiropractors in the area that are, I guess, certified, and we picked the person with the least amount of waiting lists. So someone had 12 weeks, somebody had 6 weeks, and then somebody had 5 weeks. And we just said, okay, that one. And the freaky thing is that he diagnosed over email. He said, okay, sounds like I know what your problem is, and I'm pretty sure I can fix it in 1 visit. And at that point, we were thousands of dollars in, had no answer. I thought I was going to have to put him down if he could barely eat. And we got the chiropractor out. It was a very stressful 5 weeks of waiting. And he came and he told me that Kai just had C7 in his neck, subluxated out of place. And he did his thing, and he pretty much body slammed Kai's neck to put it back. And I swear my horse walked out of that stall cured. He stepped over the stall edge rather than tripping and cantered off as if it was the most miraculous thing I'd ever seen in my entire life. And I thought I was going to have to put him down. I did not have an answer. The entire vet college could not help me. And that was the rundown of Kai's chiropractor story.
Ada, thank you. I just wanted Ada to share that story because I was with her over the internet while it was happening. And I'm so glad, it's just a testament to what can be done. I mean, it's not always going to work. Sometimes there's, of course, damage that has happened that it's so extreme, but it's certainly worth a try. And after hearing what happened with Ada, and also
I wanted to say something. First of all, Ada, I'm so sorry you had that experience, and I'm elated that the result was a good one. Chiropractors think differently. We think about neurology first. We think about transit. We think about what's in the way. We just think differently. I tend to also diagnose over the phone, but I don't say that because I like to be in person, but my brain's already going, it's calculating and it's listening. And, because you had the visual disturbances and the vestibular circular walking, I know that's a lesion on the cerebellum and obviously C7, C6, I know where those nerves transit to. So does he. And that's why, why we know what to do in most of the cases. So going forward, yeah. I'm here if you need to talk.
That is amazing. Thank you so much. I would like to add that I wanted to let the vets know that worked on him know what had fixed him because they couldn't come up with an answer. They couldn't do anything for me. They sent him home and just said, like, undiagnosed. I thought that I was so excited to let them know that he's still alive, first of all, because if no improvement, I was going to put him down. And they just said, don't go with chiropractors because they are not insured. They cannot do anything for you. And I actually had to quit the vet that I've been getting out for the entire time that I've had that horse before because he refused to treat us after I said that I'm going to be getting a chiropractor out for him regularly. What was that about?
Why would someone refuse to treat you when you had a successful outcome? Veterinarians, as chiropractors, as dentists, as everybody else, you're going to have old school, you're going to have ones that feel a certain way, and then you're going to have progressive ones. In my human practice, I interact with neurosurgeons and orthopedists and neurologists and naturopaths, and we're so progressive in our thinking that there are no walls on our clinic. There are no walls because the world is at our fingertips, and you want to be with a team that is thinking that way, because then you're gonna get well.
Mm-hmm. This is so amazing. Thank you so much for doing this.
I look forward to meeting you one day.
I have met you a little bit at Farrah's. I was just there watching when you were there to treat Diego.
Yeah, the really blonde hair. Ada, thank you so much for sharing that story. I appreciate it.
Please do a part 2. Please come back. This was my favorite IHA live. I will not be quiet until you come back.
Okay.
Okay. So there was just a quick question from I don't know how old Zinnia is. I think she's about 6 or 7, but she asked, do minis also need chiropractic care?
Anything with a spine and a spinal cord, anything. I work on, 2,000-pound bulls. I worked on a rat. I have worked on goats and pigs and, and minis and Percherons and horses where I look like an ant standing next to them. And then I worked on Chihuahuas where I use my 2 little fingertips. So anything that has a spine and spinal cord will benefit from chiropractic restoring motion.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That was Zinnia. She thanks you for that answer.
You're welcome, Zinnia.
Okay, so it sounds, we're already 10 minutes over and everyone seemed to really enjoy that. Oh, Ada had a bunch of rats, so she didn't know that she could have benefited from chiropractic care from her rats.
Maybe going forward, what I can do is do a live demo. Farrah, maybe you and I can coordinate that where I can you know, we could broadcast from one of the arenas or something, and you guys can, would you, I don't know, would you like that? Maybe that.
Absolutely. We've got the setup to do that, Dr. Pat, and it looks like everyone would really enjoy that.
Great.
And so please leave a comment here in the chat before you leave. We hope if you've enjoyed this session tonight, we're going to make sure that Dr. Pat's links are available. And especially for those of you, if you have questions, contacting, we're getting lots of thanks and hearts. Dr. Pat, loved every minute of it. Absolutely, it was awesome. We appreciate your comments. And we are definitely going to have Dr. Pat back, and it's probably going to be within the confines of the IHA membership. We might have those also randomly on the IHA Live, but Dr. Pat, we can maybe possibly get her once every month or once every 2 months for a consultation live just like this, and it would be fabulous to do a demo with you, Dr. Pat. Thank you. You know, one little thing, I just have one last question for you, Dr. Pat. Often I take one of those curry combs with the teeth on them, the big rubber curry combs, and every time before I ride my horse and every time after I ride my horse, I go all along their spine where I'm going to put the saddle, all along their neck, down their croup, and of course underneath their belly. And I think it's probably one of the simplest things that I can do when you were talking about just stimulating those nerves and stimulating those the tissues and fascia. I think you just confirmed that what I'm doing is actually helpful in getting that circulation going.
Farrah, I don't worry about you. You see, you have that instinct, you know, you seem to know what to do and when, and that of course, you're physically deforming tissue. You're stimulating the counteroceptive axons. You know, you're stimulating blood flow and just creating a healthier, you know, somatic system for the horse. So keep on doing it.
Fabulous. And that's something that you can all do at home. It's very, very simple, making sure before you people just think you're wiping your dust off your horse's back before you ride, but that's, like Dr. Pat said, you're stimulating flow and tissue. So we have fabulous comments. Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you for doing this presentation and zest for helping animals and people. We very much appreciate. Lynette says, great info. Can't wait to hear more of wonderful information you have and are willing to share. Thank you.
Great.
So I think we had a great, successful evening, Dr. Pat. Thank you so much for running home to be a part of this IHA Live. And for more information, see the IHA Facebook page and the IHA website, internationalhorsemanship.org. We'll see you again soon, everyone.
Bye, guys. Thanks for having me.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Good
Bye.
stuff. Thanks.